Good evening, good evening. Welcome back to another workshop with us here at the Information Security Club at the University of Calgary. My name's Jeremy. I'm a director in the club. I'm here to host our workshop for this evening. I'll bring the slides up here. Malware hunting with memory forensics. If this is the first time you're at the workshop, at one of our workshops, and I see there's at least one person here that said that they're just tuning in for the first time, our Discord channel has instructions for installing the tool that we're going to be using tonight, Volatility. If you haven't been able to do that, you can find that in the announcements in our Discord channel, as well as all of the files that you're going to need for tonight's workshop. That's where you can find all of the samples that we'll be using. As well, I want to welcome anyone that's brand new from the University of Calgary. I know we've had a lot of people join our Discord server recently. I believe there's quite a few of the first-year students that just heard about us through one of the classroom presentations that was given by one of our junior execs. So welcome to anyone that's just joining us for the first time. With that, let's get started. We've got a lot to do tonight. Step one is attendance for the club. I'm going to leave this up for just a second. I'll post the attendance link for you in the chat. And it's sending, but taking its time. There we go. Should be out. So that's the link for the attendance form that you can sign. That proves that you were here and attended our workshop. That's important because to be a voting member in our club, you have to attend at least half of the workshops throughout the year, and we keep track. We also like to know how many people are out there and watching. It helps us know when things are working and when they're not. So I'll go ahead and give you just another minute to fill that information in. If you're not a University of Calgary student, you can still sign the attendance form. Just put a 0 for your student number. It tells us that you're not a student. With that, I think I'll go ahead and keep going. To anyone that's, sorry, I should say anyone that's worried about signing the attendance form, we need these to prove that students are coming to our club events for the university. They like to know that students are attending, that this is a student club, and they like to know how many people are coming. That's another reason that we do this, is to sort of keep track of how many students are attending and how many people become full members, full voting members by attending at least half of our workshops. All right, so I'm going to keep going. So tonight, we are going to be looking at memory dumps and memory images from machines, and we're going to be trying to find malware inside of them. To do that, we're going to start by sort of learning about what memory dumps are, looking at the volatility tool after that, and then there are 3 memory dumps that I have for you. There's actually 4. A 4th one is sort of extra bonus at the end. If you're feeling ambitious and you're enjoying what you were doing, there's flags inside of that memory dump. The rest of them don't have flags. The tools that we're going to be using for this are Volatility 2. If you haven't had a chance, there's quite a list of install instructions. They're located in our Discord server. We posted them last week and held office hours on Friday. Nobody showed up to ask any questions, so we're hoping that everybody got it installed all right. Other tools that we're using are a website called Mnemonic and a website called virustotal.com. Virustotal.com we talked about quite a bit last year during the malware workshops that we did at that time. So you have 4 files that I listed for you to download. A word of warning right now that I have to get out there. These are going to be memory dumps. I'll explain what those are. These files, dump 1, dump 2, and dump 3, contain malware. That is bad code, dangerous stuff that you should not play around with unless you know what you are doing. The sort of caveat to this is that it's not really live malware, which is to say it's not running on a machine. What you are getting is a snapshot of memory of what was in the memory, and inside of there is some malware that we're going to locate and sort of take a look at. So it's not dangerous to open these files and to look in them. The malware is not able to run just by looking at these. If you wanted to, you could probably pull it out and run it on a machine, but thankfully we are running this on Kali. Our Kali instances should be inside of a virtual machine or isolated in some way. Last year, I built you a virtual or a sandbox, a sort of malware sandbox where we could run malware live inside of and keep it contained. This time, it's just memory dumps. So the warning is that 3 of these files, memory dump 1, 2, and 3, contain malware, but it's not really useful and it's not going to get out. It's not going to do anything dangerous. We're going to be looking at it. All right, goals for the workshop are to understand memory dumps, learn volatility, going to learn the basics of memory forensics and how that works, learn to hunt for indicators of compromise, and I'll talk about those a little later, and learn to identify malware that we find inside of a machine. And there's some questions that are coming in. Mark asks, run it in a sandbox. Yes, so that's sandbox is a term that we use for sort of an isolated environment where you can play around with things and run things. So last year we did some malware workshops, and I built a VM, a virtual machine that people downloaded and could install on VirtualBox, and inside there was all the malware, and they could run the malware in that virtual machine, but it couldn't get out. It couldn't infect their machine. It was safe to run it in this VirtualBox. We could have it toy around and mess with that machine, but it wasn't allowed to escape. So that's what I mean by run it in a sandbox. Useful courses for this workshop. We always like to do this to sort of attach the things that you learn at school to the things that we do here in the club. You learn lots of amazing things in university, but you might not learn how to make it hands-on, how to make it super useful. So we like to connect the things that you're doing here with the courses and the things that you're learning in class. Unfortunately, Computer Science 527, the Computer Viruses and Malware course, is no more. It's dead and gone. The university keeps it listed as a course on the books for, I've heard, bureaucratic reasons. Unfortunately, it sounds like it's never coming back, and I will never forget that this course once existed, and when it came my turn to take it, it disappeared. So Computer Science 527, gone but not forgotten. The other one that is useful is Computer Science 457, the Operating Systems course, which I believe is pretty much a required course for computer science at the U of C. But learning how operating systems work, learning how the components of the machine works are all sort of useful for what we're going to be doing here today. So you're playing around on your machine. You have a Windows machine, and all of a sudden this happens. If you've ever used Windows and never come across this, which is known as the blue screen of death, congratulations. You're doing something right, or you're not doing anything at all in your machine. But it's fairly common if you've used Windows for a long time. You've probably seen one of these. It's known as the blue screen of death. It's been in Windows since almost the very beginning. And it's telling you that bad things have happened on your machine. We've talked about this in other workshops. This is essentially your machine getting into a state where everything has to crash and disappear. It can't do anything more. Everything has died, and it needs to try to save itself by crashing the machine. So this can happen all the time in Windows for many different reasons. In fact, it gives you the reason down at the bottom. It says stop code, critical process died. So yeah, some people are talking in the chat. They're saying, yeah, I had an update and this happened all the time. And yeah, sometimes when changes happen to the machine, something doesn't work right, Windows tries to fix them. So what you might not have really thought about is, what is this screen actually doing? Because usually when this blue screen of death happens in newer Windows machines, you will see this number, 20% complete, and it'll start counting up. And it says it's collecting some error info, and what you might not be aware of is what it's creating is it's creating a memory dump of your machine. So you've seen machines create memory dumps, you've sort of seen that process before, but you might not really have been aware of what it was. So we're going to talk a little bit about what those are, but this is just to sort of connect you to what a memory dump is. So a memory dump. A memory dump is also known as a crash dump, a core dump, system dump, or kernel memory dump. Sometimes people will use these terms all interchangeably. Some of them actually mean sort of more specific things, but somebody might refer to a system dump or a core dump what they're talking about is a memory dump, but like kernel memory dump is something far more specific, but sometimes people will use them interchangeably. And what this is I think I've said this before, it's a snapshot of the memory state in the machine. And when I say memory, it's important to understand that I don't mean what's on your hard drive, I mean what's in the RAM on your computer. So I know we have some people, like I said, that are newer to computer science in the club. So let's just make sure that we understand the difference between memory and storage. There should be a slide here explaining this, but it's not here. Maybe the wrong thing was loaded. Okay, let me just explain this without the slide. Yeah, I'm sorry. Apparently the wrong slide deck has loaded when we loaded it into our presentation software here. Okay, so when we say storage, what we mean is the hard drive, and it's also referred to as persistent memory. This is the stuff you store on your computer that isn't affected by the power going out. This is the sort of big distinction between RAM and the hard drive, is that when you shut the power off to your computer, everything in the RAM is gone, whereas everything in the hard drive stays there. Yeah, storage is the hard drive or persistent memory, whereas when people say things that are in memory, they usually are referring to what's in the RAM on your computer. And this is also known as volatile memory. Volatile because when the power is lost, all the memory is zeroed out, is erased. So that's important. The tool we're using tonight is called volatility, and that's because it examines what's inside of that RAM in that volatile memory. And so, yeah, the takeaway from this is that a memory dump is just a snapshot of what is in the memory, by which we refer to the RAM. And so to give you an example of sort of how that works, let's say you're at home, you're working on an assignment. You've opened a Word document and you've started typing. Now, you're typing away. You haven't saved this document yet. You can see it's still untitled. As you're working away and typing things into this document, all of the stuff that you're typing is being saved into the memory on the computer, into the RAM. And once you decide to save the file, in case the power goes out or something happens on your machine and it crashes, you get one of those blue screens of death, you don't want to lose everything. What you do is you give it a name and you save it to somewhere on the hard drive. So then there's a copy of that on the hard drive for you whenever you want. We're going to ignore the fact that Microsoft actually is always saving it to the hard drive for you to avoid the loss of the file. You probably know that when you're typing something out in Microsoft Word and the power goes out, you can usually turn your machine back on and it'll load some of the work that you had. But in days of old, when that thing didn't exist, you had to save the file all the time. Otherwise, blue screen of death or power outage, you lost the file because it's not saved on the hard drive. So in this case, you've saved it to the hard drive. Now if you shut your computer down and start it back up, that file is on the hard drive. It is not located in the RAM on your machine. And if you got the blue screen of death here, and the blue screen of death creates its memory dump of what was happening inside of the machine, so it puts it all into one file, your homework file would not be inside of that memory dump because it was not loaded into the memory, into the RAM on this computer. So let's do it one more time. Let's do this example one more time, except this time you're going to open the file on your machine. So you've loaded it from the hard drive onto the computer. Now it's in RAM. Now when the blue screen of death comes and the memory dump is created, your homework file is going to be in that memory dump because it was inside of the RAM when this memory dump was created. So the memory dump is just taking whatever is in RAM. It doesn't care what's on the hard drive. This slide, I think, moved. This is the one that I was trying to talk about earlier. So yeah, RAM versus hard drive, memory versus storage, and volatile versus persistent. What we care about is the RAM, not the hard drive. These memory dumps that we're going to be looking at, this is what was happening in the machine while it was running at a certain point. So yeah, we're going to look at these snapshots of memory, and these are created, you can create them with your virtual machines if you have one set up for Kali. You can pause the machine and you can tell it to create a memory dump, and it will take everything that is in RAM and it'll put it all into a file, and then you can look at it. We're going to be doing that with examples from machines that had malware on them. And so that's what this workshop is about looking at the memory that was on a machine at a certain point and trying to figure out what that malware was or what was happening inside of the machine. So we're going to hunt for malware in images. So why do you want to dump memory? Why would we make a memory dump? And it's because a memory dump is sort of a snapshot, like I said, of the machine state. So imagine if you're programming and you want to debug your machine, or sorry, you want to debug your program. You can have your IDE or whatever it is you're using to code, usually, depending on the program. You can tell it to step through your program step by step, and you can see what the variables are equal to. So if you're in a loop, let's say, you can stop the loop at some point and see how many times you've been through the loop. And so imagine that on a big scale for your entire operating system. You want an image of what's happening inside of the operating system, the whole computer, as if it were one big program, and you can go in and examine everything that was happening inside of it. And this is because you really want to understand the failure state. So what was happening when things went bad? So if a machine, like when the blue screen of death comes on in Windows and it creates that dump, it's trying to take everything that was happening in memory at the time that things went wrong, and then Windows can take a look, or Microsoft can take a look at that and try to say, what caused the machine to stop? Let's try to fix the code that caused this. So this is really useful for developers, but it's also useful for us in cybersecurity as incident responders. So these memory dumps can happen when the machine crashes, like the blue screen of death, but we can also just take a snapshot whenever we want. There are programs that will do it, or if you run a virtual machine, you can, like I said, take a snapshot. And this is really useful for us as incident responders. So you might be asking, what is incident response? It's a field inside of cybersecurity, and these are the people that respond to cyber incidents. So let's imagine that you're a small, a medium, even sometimes large companies won't have people that do this. And you're the victim of a hack, some sort of breach, some ransomware gets in and encrypts a whole bunch of your files, or there's just malware running on your system doing bad things. You might have a sort of systems administrator who's in charge of making sure everyone's sort of email is working and that their accounts are all set up and that the firewalls are working and that nothing's getting in. But if something does get in and starts causing chaos, that systems administrator might not be qualified to sort of fix the system and figure out what happened. In that case, you would probably hire someone from a company that does incident response, and they would come in and sort of figure out what is happening now, what came in that caused this, how to fix it, how to get things up and running, and then they would try to figure out what happened and how to stop it to make sure it doesn't happen again. Because it's not good enough to have malware on your sort of, I don't know, your university and shut it down without knowing how it got in, because it could come back in. However it got onto your system, it could come back. So these people are sort of in charge of figuring out how to fix what's happening and try to stop or help stop it from happening again. And one of the ways that they can do this is they can take memory dumps, and they do this on computers. They will take a snapshot of what's happening on the machine, and they'll use it for something called static analysis. So we talked about this last year with our malware workshops. Static analysis is sort of looking at some memory, some information, and trying to figure out what's in it. Dynamic analysis is letting something run to see what it does. And last year we did a lot of dynamic analysis with malware. We let it run inside of those virtual machines that we created. And then we watched it change processes and create files, and that was how one of the ways we were analyzing it, was watching what it was doing and keeping track of what was changing. Static analysis is, like I said, we just take a snapshot, a picture, and we try to look at that and figure out what's going on inside. So this can be really useful for incident responders, and this is also known as forensic analysis. So you're just looking at the memory, trying to figure out what's in there, anything that's bad, anything that shouldn't be there, anything suspicious. And it helps you figure out what happened or is happening, and of course, respond to it. So in this workshop tonight, we are going to be pretending that we are incident responders. This is how I've sort of framed the things that are going to be happening. You're going to be analyzing memory dumps that I'm giving you, and you're going to try to figure out what malware has infected the machine that this memory dump has come from. That's your goal for tonight, is to try to figure out the malware that I'm giving you and what it's doing. To do this, and this is important, I want you to take notes on everything you find. These are clues as to what's happening inside of the machine. And this is important. There are steps that we are going to do where we're going to get some information, and then 3 or 4 steps later, we're going to need that information that we got earlier. So there's one of the first steps you'll see. I'm going to give you some process numbers. There's numbers assigned to the processes inside of the machine, and you're going to need those a few steps later. So it's good to write these things down. Sometimes I just copy the whole output and toss it into a notepad file or just like a text file. And I also want you at times to stop and think about what you've found. It can be really easy for me to just tell you, run this command, and then tell you what you're looking at. And then you just go and run commands and do whatever I tell you. I really want you to sort of stop and try to think about what it is you're looking at inside of the machine. And when you find things, try to think, what could this be, or what have I just found? Finally, the notes that you're going to take are important because what you're looking for are these things called indicators of compromise. I mentioned them a little bit earlier. An indicator of compromise, and this is a term that we use in malware, an indicator of compromise is anything that might help identify the malware or might be unique to that malware. So the malware that you get might be looking for something specific. Maybe it's looking for some specific file on your computer, and somewhere in that malware there's a string. And that string is probably unique to that malware, so you pull that out. That could be an indicator of compromise. Maybe the malware is trying to connect back to a command and control server, someone that's telling it what to do on your computer or telling it to download stuff from your computer. In that case, it might have an IP address inside of it. You want to pull that out. That IP address will be an indicator of compromise. If you find it anywhere else on your machine, it's probably a sign that something else is malware and it's trying to connect out from your machine. So we're going to try to find these things, and they're used by malware and incident responders and malware analysis and response people to try to identify malware. So if you have a bunch of files on your computer, you would search through all of them and you would see if they have that IP address, or if they have that string, or if they have the bytes or a certain amount of code that lines up with previous malware, then it's probably malware as well, and you want to stop it or quarantine it. And again, last year in the malware workshops, we looked at Yara and Yara rules and how to scan your computer for those kinds of indicators of compromise. But we're going to find some of them tonight, and I'll point them out when we find them. But like I said, try to keep notes because it's going to be useful for what we're doing. Okay, so the question is, how do you do this? And the answer is volatility, the tool that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to try to keep this brief. I've been talking for quite a while now. So volatility is a memory forensics tool. So that snapshot of everything that's in RAM, this is a tool that's going to help you look at it. And it does it by examining those memory dumps. It's created by this group called the Volatility Foundation, which is interestingly a nonprofit. There are two versions of it. One of them written in Python 2 and one of them written in Python 3. And I know the general rule is never use Python 2 anymore. In fact, you shouldn't be. If you have a choice, you should use Python 3. In this case, however, Volatility has better packages, plugins, and support in Python 2 than it does in Python 3. So Volatility existed for a while Python 2 was around. People wrote a lot of useful things for it. And then Python 3 came out, and people haven't been catching up and writing these plugins as much. And these plugins are what are going to do the specific tasks inside of inside of Volatility. So you're going to run Volatility as a tool, and then you're going to tell it, I want to use this plugin. And the plugins are going to do the specific things that you want. And I'll show you a command to show you what that looks like. For example, there's a lot of plugins in Volatility 2. This is a list of them. This is what it looks like. We are not going to go through all of these tonight. We are going to sort of cherry pick a sample of some of the most useful ones of these. But there are a lot of tools that are available for you to look through these memory dumps. This slide I meant to change, but this is what a volatility command looks like. And I want you to take a look at this and just follow along for a second, because sort of understanding the pattern here is going to be important. So if you followed the install instructions I gave you, then vol.py should run the volatility program. After that usually comes tacf, which is the file that you're going to, the memory dump file that you want to examine. After that comes profile equals, and that is going to tell Volatility what the operating system was on the machine that the memory dump comes from. So it's not enough to just say, here's a bunch of memory, just look at it. Volatility needs to know, was this a Windows operating system? Was it a Linux operating system? Because depending on which one it is going to change what it looks for inside of the memory. The memory is going to be laid out really differently for different operating systems. And then after that, you tell it the plugin that you want, and then you give it the plugin options. But these first couple, vol.py, tacf, the dump file, and then the profile, those are almost always going to be the same. Those are always going to be there for pretty much every single command we run. You'll see those over and over and over. So I just want you to see what that looks like, but I'm going to send you the commands and they're going to be there. So yeah, stop talking, Jeremy. It's been almost a half an hour. It's time to start doing stuff. So before we start doing stuff, what I want to do is to set up the files that we're going to use. So I'm going to switch to my terminal here. If you downloaded the files that I gave you, then good. Put them wherever it is that you want to use them. I've located mine in this location here. This is where I've put my samples. So if I type ls to C, there are the zip files that I gave you for download. What we need to do is start by unzipping them. So I'm going to unzip dump1.zip. So unzip is the command, and you tell it to unzip the first zip file, and it'll start doing that, except it is going to stop you and ask for the password. Because these contain malware, we put passwords on them so that they don't accidentally get opened up by people that don't know what's going on. And the password that you want is, I'm going to type it into the chat. And there you go. The password is sick magpie. So if I type that in, it will inflate. Yes, someone says that they don't have unzip. That's possible. Somebody replied, you may have to install unzip. So you can do sudo apt get install unzip, and that will install unzip for you if you don't have it on your machine. So I'm going to give you just a second to unzip this. And once you unzip it, you should see that there's a folder called dump1. And if you go into the dump1 folder, there's your memory dump. So that's what it looks like right there. So the kind of file it is a vmem. It's virtual memory. This is probably from, I think, VMware. If it's a vmem file, it just sort of tells us a little bit about what virtual machine it might have come from. Yeah, sorry, there's someone in chat who's having trouble. Yeah, you can jump into our Discord. There's someone in there one of our execs who will help you get this installed. But I'm just gonna keep going for now. So yeah, I'm gonna stay in this location. That dump1.vmem is what I want. So yeah, again, stop talking. So the first plugin we're going to use is called image info. And this is always the first step that we do when we're analyzing these memory files, these memory dumps. When using volatility, this is the first step that we always do. What this is going to do is going to try to figure out what the operating system is for the memory. I told you that you need that operating system, but you don't know what it is. So that's the command. Sorry, there's a question here. Is the file with the malware actually being stored in the PC? Sorry, is the file with the malware actually being stored in the PC? If you've downloaded the file, then sorry, the file that this virtual memory file is going to be on your computer. Yes. It's going to be a bunch of memory, and somewhere in that memory there is malware. Like I said earlier, it can't be, it won't run on your machine though. But we're going to talk about where the malware inside of this memory is being stored. That's part of what we're going to do here tonight. So I am going to copy this command and toss it into chat for you. And then I'm going to run that command myself. And I'll give you guys a chance to run it as well. If I could type, this would be a lot easier. So I've run this already, and I've got a bunch of commands that are sitting in my history. So there we go, vol.py, so run volatility, use the file dump1.vmem, and then I want the plugin image info. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And this is volatility running now. So it's looking through the memory of, or it's looking through this file, this memory dump, and it's trying to find signs of what the operating system might be. And when it's done running, this is what it looks like. There's a lot of information here. This will tell you sort of when this memory image was made. This one was made in 2012. And the important part that we really want is the suggested profiles. So this is going to be the list of operating systems that it cares about, the ones that it thinks that it's found that you can use with volatility. So in this case, it's telling us this is Windows XP Service Pack 2 on an x86 machine, or Windows XP Service Pack 3 on an x86 machine. It could be one of these two service packs. We'll go ahead and use the first one. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to copy that first one because we're going to need to use it. But this is important. This is telling us what the operating system could be. Sometimes it'll find even more than this. I think later on we might find one that has even more than this. But for now, this is usually the first one will work. If that one doesn't work, you can sort of iterate through the list. But I'll show you now where we're going to use that. So yeah, we learned how to use image info. This tells us what kind of image we're using. So the first thing we're going to use is called PS list. PS list is a way of listing all of the processes that were running in the computer at the time of the memory dump. And that might not make a lot of sense. You might not totally understand what that means, but once I show it to you, you might recognize it a little more. So I'll go ahead and toss that command in. That's the command you want there. And I'm going to go back to the window. I'm going to keep that down the bottom. If people need more time to see that command, let me know. But the easy thing to do if you're not familiar with Linux is to just press the up arrow, and that will go back through the commands that you've already done. So I want to go back to that previous one I ran, and I can add things. So I'm going to add profile equals. I'm going to paste. That's not what I want. I should have pasted this clipboard. Nope. I've copied this again. Oh, I copied it to put it in the window for you. But we want Win XP Service Pack 2 x86. This was the operating system. And then we want to run the plugin. So from now on, almost all the commands we have are going to have these first three things: vol.py, the file, and then the profile. And then after that, like I said, comes the plugin. This is the pattern that we're going to be following for most of the rest of the night. So we're just going to keep changing the plugin, and then anything after the plugin will be options for that plugin. But the beginning is just telling volatility what you want it to run. So we're going to run PS tree. No, we're going to run PS list. Jeremy. I'm jumping ahead. So this is what PS list looks like for me. I've got my font jacked up, but this is what it looks like. Maybe if I take it down just a little. Nope. So what is this? This is all the processes, like I said, that were running on the machine. So if you've used Windows and you've had to hit Alt-Control-Delete, you've probably seen one of the menus in your task manager will show you everything that's running, and you can shut things down that aren't responding. This is something similar. This is just all of those things that were running on the machine at the time the memory dump was created. So we know that this is a Windows machine that this memory comes from, and someone took a snapshot of that machine while it was running, and this is everything that was running when this memory snapshot was created. This memory file will tell us everything that was running inside of the machine. So this can be useful. There are things that are listed up here. So offset just tells us where in the memory file that is. The name will tell us what that process was. So we can see system, SMSS, LSAS, SVC host. The problem here is that if you're not super familiar, or sorry, not even super familiar, you guys have probably used Windows, but if you haven't used Windows internally or developed on Windows, you might not know what these processes are. And that's okay. I'm going to be asking you at some point what of these looks suspicious, and you're not going to know, but that's okay because you probably haven't seen these before. I'll try to explain some of them as we go through. So LSAS manages login and security. SVC host is, I believe, for network connections. WinLogon is for logging in. So you can see there's a bunch of these things that are probably creating connections. Explorer is just your Windows Explorer, so it's what you're using to sort of click around your GUI and to run things. Spool SV might be a printer, if I remember. Reader SL, I'm not sure what that is, and I'm not sure what these are. These aren't things that I'm familiar with as being regular Windows processes. But we could try to figure out what they are by giving them a quick search. But before we do that, I'm going to go to the next command, which is a little more useful than pslist. So this just tells us what's running on the machine, and it helps us to understand what programs are running on the machine, because we're trying to figure out what's malicious and what's malware. The next command is the one that I typed in originally. It's pstree. So it's that same command that we just ran, but it's pstree instead of pslist. And what this is going to do is it's going to list out these processes, but it's going to show us sort of their relationship to one another. And that's important for understanding which programs might have started which other programs. So let me do the same thing here. I apologize if this seems a little bit slow for some of you. I'm trying not to go too fast because I don't want people to sort of fall behind. But I'm going to go back to my window. Instead of typing that all out, I'm just going to click the up arrow and pstree. And volatility is going to run now with the pstree plugin. So this is the same thing that we just saw. This is the list of processes, but as you can see over here, these dots and these indentations are telling us the relationship of the processes to one another. And the way that it's doing that is that over here you can see PID, which is the process ID. So every process that gets run on your computer gets assigned a number by the operating system. And these are the numbers here that are being assigned. The bigger the number, the more recently the program was run. It just counts up in these processes. But over here is PPID, which is the parent process ID. So what started this process? And so you can see here the system process was started by 0. So it was the first process to start up. It started at system boot, and its process ID is 4. And then over here, the SMSS.exe, its parent process was 4, and its process ID is 368. So it was created by system, and we can just see that here because it's indented under system. And then the same thing. So SMSS, process 368, it creates WinLogon, process 608. Process 608 creates this services process. And so that's how we can see the relationship. So services.exe starts up a whole bunch of processes here. All of these were started by services. And then this SVC host starts up 2 processes here. This WUAUCLT. So this is interesting. This helps us to understand what the relationship of these things are to one another. And we can see down at the bottom, through all of these, Explorer, the one that is usually what the user is running, it started up this readersl.exe, which is interesting. It means that if it comes from Explorer, it means that it's more than likely the user that started it up. If you were to see a memory dump from a computer where somebody ran Minesweeper, it would look something like that. It would look like Explorer ran, and then Minesweeper started from Explorer. So that might not be suspicious, but we still don't know what readersl.exe is, and the fact that it has a high PID number means that it was started more recently. The other way we can tell that it was likely started more recently is by looking at the time that it was created. So remember I was asking you to write stuff down? You can go ahead and just copy this whole thing out. This is all going to be super useful. This is all going to be useful for us later on. But this is also telling us when these processes were created. So we can see that the system, when it started up, it looks like around 2:42 and 31 seconds. Then there's a whole bunch of things that run all within a couple of seconds of that. So if a machine was booting up, that's kind of what we would expect. We would want to see all of that. These two look like they start a sort of minute or two later. So it took some time before this ran. This looks like it started around boot up. This took another 30 seconds. This started around boot. These both started around boot. Interestingly, this explorer.exe started also around boot, as well as this reader process. So it's kind of interesting that Explorer started up and then whatever reader SL is started up immediately, almost exactly at the same time. That could be a little weird. My suspicion is that this is started by the user if it comes from Explorer, but it was started immediately as Explorer was started. So that could be a sign of something suspicious going on. Okay, so we've seen the PS tree. Let's move on to our next plugin. The next plugin we're going to use is called ConScan. It's going to scan for active network connections. So we can take a look at our memory dump and see on the computer, this is what connections were running on the machine at this time. Again, super useful. We don't have to have the machine running, and we can see what it was trying to do, what connections it was trying to make. Go ahead and paste that in. If anyone has any questions, by all means, toss them in the chat. I hope you're able to follow along. If something does happen, you can try to jump into our Discord channel. Our execs and our team are in there. They'll be able to help you. They tested this workshop. So there's the command down at in the pop-up that I just put in there. I'm going to go ahead and try running that myself. So same thing. I'm going to go back to the previous command, get rid of PS tree, and we want ConScan. So again, volatility, brilliant tool, does its stuff. Not too much. So this is a list of all the connections that were running on the machine at the time of the memory dump. And looks like we've got two. And it tells us what the local address was, what the machine that the memory dump comes from. This is probably its IP address. This is the port that was being used. So that it looks like there was two ports that were open on the host machine. And these are the places that it was connecting out to. So interestingly, this machine was trying to make connections out to the internet. And a great thing that we really like. Oops, sorry. Just trying to create up this a bit. It'll tell us what process was trying to create this connection. So I'm going to go ahead and go up and run PS tree again. When we practiced this, I was able to open Notepad, but because of the particularities of Linux, I can't share my screen that way, so I'm just going to do it sort of like this. So the process that was trying to open these connections was 1484. And if we look down here, process 1484 was Explorer. So Explorer was trying to open network connections to IP addresses. And that's a bit weird. That's a little bit suspicious. We wouldn't really expect Explorer to find those things or to try to make those connections. It's possible it could, maybe, but it's not entirely likely that it is. I don't know if it's normal. I wouldn't say that it's entirely normal. I would go ahead and copy these down. Whatever these remote IP addresses are, remember I talked about indicators of compromise? These could be indicators of compromise. If these are malicious IP addresses, or if these are associated with, I don't know, Russian websites or gangs or botnets or anything like that, we would want to find out. So keep those. Those could be something, if this was malware, maybe it's trying to create some outside connections. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this out. And I'm going to toss it in my notepad that I have off on the side. And I'm going to copy off all of this stuff because I want to remember. Of course, I did the classic Control C to cancel. There we go. I've pasted it all into a file, so now I can look back at these pretty quickly. All right. So we are going to keep going. So that's connection scan. We've got 2 connections that are going out. We've now got some IP addresses that it was trying to connect to. We've got some notes on that. That's maybe suspicious. We're going to look into that a little more. The next plugin we're going to look into is CMD line or command line. And this is going to display the command line arguments for the processes that are running in the machine. So same drill. I'm going to copy this in for you guys and paste it into the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and run this myself. So CMD line. And we get a big old list. This is a big old list of all of the command line, what was put into the command line to run the things that are running right now. And it's nice. It tells us what the process is, and it tells us its process ID number. And this is what we use, again, to identify all of these processes. So that's everything that we saw that was running, and we can see where the processes came from. So like this LSAS process comes from Windows Systems 32. That seems normal. That's where we would expect the LSAS process to launch from. All of these SVC hosts, these are all coming from System 32. Again, something that Windows uses a lot. So yeah, we can see what these were all using for command arguments. This Explorer process is coming from C Windows Explorer.exe. That might not be right. I can't remember if that's where Explorer lives inside of Windows. I thought most of them live in System 32. But this one might just be in C Windows. So that's something we might want to look up. I'm just going to copy that out. Also, I'm pretending that I don't know what's malicious and what isn't. I do, but it's part of the theater of it all. The other one that we said was sort of weird was this was started by Explorer, Reader SL. So I'm going to copy that out. Because it's starting from Adobe, and it looks like Adobe Reader 9. So this is some sort of process that might be associated with Adobe. So let's copy that out as well. So those are 2 interesting things that we might want to take a look at a little while down the road. So we are going to now sort of take stock on what it is that we have found. Switch back. So far, we know that there was an Explorer.exe, and it launched Reader SL. It was the last thing launched. It looks like it's Adobe Reader, and it seems to have connections to the internet. It would be nice to examine these programs to sort of find out more about them if we could. Can we do that? And the answer is yes. Volatility will let us know more about these programs. But before we do that, it would be nice to know if reader_sl.exe is really associated to Adobe Reader. So what you can do is I'm going to give you 1 minute, do some internet searching, see if you can figure out if reader_sl is associated to Adobe Reader. Use your Googling skills. If you're in a computer science degree especially, this is your best friend. So I know I'm not sharing my screen with you. I'm going to let you guys run this at the same time. I'm just tossing reader_sl.exe into Google and just seeing what's in this list. Is there anything here that jumps out as possibly a virus? Is there anything that talks about viruses here? So again, I'll give you like a minute. And if you find anything that you think is useful, toss it in the chat. Say I found this and I think blank. All right, that's about a minute. Toss it into chat if you found anything interesting. What I find are a lot of sites that say, yes, Reader SL is associated to Adobe Reader, but if it's malware, you want to look at the following things. That could be because I've been searching up malware stuff on my computer, and Google is just showing me a lot of malware-related things. I'm not sure if you guys got quite the same thing as I did in that search. But we want to keep an eye on this Reader SL process. It would be interesting to know where it's supposed to be installed and to know if that's the same as the location that we had from the memory dump. That could be interesting to find out. But instead, we're going to keep going. So can we examine these programs, the Explorer and the Reader SL? And the answer is we can. And to do it, we're going to use these two plugins. So the first one is called procdump, and the second one is called memdump. And these are two different things, longer commands, as you can see. Procdump is going to dump the process executable, so the program that is actually being run. When we found the command line arguments, we found the .exe file, and that is the actual file, the program that is running on the machine. Memdump is going to dump any memory that's associated to that process. So the first one we're going to do is procdump. Let me get the command here. And like I said, what this is going to do is get the exe file for us. And this is a longer command. So you can see here, vol.py, memdump, profile, that's all the same. Then procdump is the plugin that we want, and then it needs some options. So tacp, we're going to tell it which process we want dumped. So if you've been taking notes, like I recommended that you do, this is where I said it comes in handy. We want the process ID for explorer.exe and readersl.exe. And then the next thing is, that should be 2 dashes, I believe, dump-dir, and then I put a dot. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the actual executable file, and it's going to copy it out of the memory and put it as a file into the folder where our memory dump is. Same thing for the memdump command. Instead of taking the executable, though, it's going to take any memory, so any information that process was storing inside of the memory of the computer while this was running. So I'm going to switch, and I'm going to run these as well. So first one is procdump. Got my screens all mixed around here. So there we go. Paste, yeah. So we want our process ID number, and I'm going to go ahead and dump, I'm going to just dump the Reader SL. So that one was process, I believe it was 1640, and then dump directory is dot, and that's what I want. I just wanted to dump it in the local directory that I'm in right now. So I'm going to run this, and again, this is... the dash didn't copy properly. Yeah, that's supposed to be 2 dashes. If you copied it out of the chat that I put in there, it probably put it into 1. So dump directory should be 2 dashes. And bang, volatility has copied out. You can see there now. So there's the virtual memory file that we're examining, and there's the executable file. So executable.1640.exe. This is the actual executable for whatever for that Reader SL program. So that's good. We like that. We can do more with that. And the next, we are going to want the memory dump from that as well. So I'm going to copy that command in for you. And it's probably going to have that same problem with the 2 dashes. I'm going to paste it. And 1640. So now I want the memory that Reader SL process had. So I go ahead and do this. And because I didn't change it, dash before dump directory. And there we go. So it's writing all of the memory that was associated to that process into this file, 1640.dmp. So now if I go ls, there's the DMP. This is the memory from that process. So anything that it was writing into memory, and this is the actual process itself, the executable. So this is great. I've been able to isolate a process that I find suspicious, and I've sort of pulled it out, and now I've got it here. So the executable, we could try to reverse engineer. We could toss it into Ghidra or Cutter or any of those programs. We have workshops on how to reverse engineer. If you've done those, you'll be familiar with it. So I could do that, but here I have a file of just information that was associated to the process. In forensics, in our forensics workshops, the first thing that we teach you to do, I believe it's the first thing we teach you to do with any file, is to run strings on it to see what's inside of it, what English or sorry, what text is in there that might be characters. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to run strings on 1640.dmp. And this is what I get. There's lots of strings in there. And I could just scroll up through these. And if you were one of these incident responders trying to do a forensic analysis, you would have to sort of figure out how to look through this list of strings. There is stuff in here that stands out to people who are experienced and know what they're doing. We, let's admit, are not those people right now. We're just doing this for the first time. So that's okay. We don't hold that against anyone. It's okay to be new at something. So what we want to do is we want to figure out a little more about what's in these. So like I said, intro to forensics, we use strings. And then we also want to try to remember what tools we used in the malware workshop last year. And this is where virus total is going to come in handy. If you did the workshops last year, you'll remember virus total. It searches files and tries to find indicators of compromise. And then tell us about malware. But first we're going to do the strings thing that I talked about. We could try to search through this, but that wouldn't be really useful. There's too much in there probably for what we need. But we do have some things that we can search for. In fact, earlier we found that there were connections that were trying to be made to IP addresses. So let's see if we can't find one of those IP addresses. So I'm going to grep for that IP address. So this is why I told you to copy this down. There were two IP addresses. This was the first one that was trying to connect out to on port 8080. So I can do this, and somewhere in the memory of reader SL is that IP address. So let's, with grep, we can go tac C, uppercase C, and then 5. And this says, oh, sorry guys, I didn't switch to my console. Thanks, Nick, for letting me know. Sorry, I ran strings on the dump file, and then I grepped for the IP address. And this came back. So somewhere in there was the IP address that we found earlier when we did the con scan. That was one of the IP addresses. Inside of the memory for reader SL for some reason has this IP address inside of it. But it wasn't reader SL that was trying to make that connection. Apparently it was explorer.exe that was making the connection. So it's possible that Explorer was sort of getting blamed for this connection, but it was being made by reader SL, the child process. So let's see what else is near this for strings in the file. So I do the same thing, strings on the file, then I use the pipe, I feed it all into grep, we search for that, and then tac uppercase C. This says show me the lines around it, and we want 5 lines above and 5 lines below. So I'm going to run this, and this is what's around that IP address in the memory for reader SL. And what do we got? This is super suspicious now. And you might not see it right away, but the reason that it's suspicious is that it's got an IP address and it's making a post request. So it's trying to make a request out, probably sending information. A post is usually sending something out, and it's trying to send it to whatever this is. So it's making a post request to this, which might be some sort of directory, at this web address, or at this IP address somewhere on the web. It seems to be pretending that it's Mozilla on a Windows system, and it's sending 220, I believe that's 229 bytes worth of information. So something in here is trying to send something out. We definitely want this. That is super janky and weird. I want to keep that. That's going in my notepad file. I'm going to put it with the IP addresses. In fact, maybe I'll just grep for that. I'll just see if that shows up anywhere else in this file. Yeah, it seems to show up in a few places. It shows up in a few places, and it seems to be associated to this file, cp.php. So there's some sort of PHP file. Let's do the same thing we did before. Yeah, this shows up a few times. So there's something about this IP address that it's making connections out to. And here's another interesting thing that we're finding. That post request was being made to this IP address, 41.168.5.140. But the other times we're seeing this ZB string, it looks like it's associated to 188.40.138. Yep, same one here. And same one down here. Also, it is mentioning this thing, web bank. That seems suspicious. It's mentioning something about a bank. That could be something that is suspicious that we would want to check out. I'm going to see, does this IP address match the one that we picked out earlier? I'm going to take a look at my notes, and it does not. The other IP address we had was 125. So this is another possible indicator of compromise. I copy it out. And again, we don't know if this is bad yet. We don't know if what we have here is maybe malware, but we're just searching through its memory to see what these strings we found are. So the other IP address that we saw that was connecting out, 125.19.103.198, that's not in the memory for this at all. So yeah, we have found that the first IP address was connected to it, that there's another IP address we found, there's this sort of weird string that starts with /ZB. We also saw some mention of a bank, so I'm just going to see if there are any other mentions of bank in there. And it turns out there are. Are there a lot? There's a lot. So this is supposed to be Adobe Reader, remember? But for some reason, it's full. It's got a huge list of banks. This list doesn't stop. What do we got? Firstbanks.com. Look at these. They've some of the views/login. For some reason, it's got a list of a lot of banks, and it's looking specifically at logins for some of them. This is huge. There are so many banks in here. nsbank.com, Firstbanks, Internet e-banking. So this looks really suspicious to me. That Nashville Citizens Bank is in here. That I can't imagine that's a much bigger bank than maybe Nashville or Tennessee. Eurobank. These are banks from, it looks like, around the world. Oh, there we go. Canada's here. TD Bank. We made it. Okay, so this Reader SL thing is looking weird. Unless it had opened a file full of banking information, this probably shouldn't be in here. So let's try to do a little more investigation into this. And to do that, we could look at the executable. So that's what's in the memory. We could try to run strings on the executable and see what's in there, but it's not .dump. Executable.exe, and we're going to just grep bank in that. and nothing's going to come out. And this is because if you remember, this is an executable file. It's probably not going to have a lot of text inside of it. Even if I run just strings, there's some stuff in here. This is all for whatever the program is that's running. These look like registry keys. So you could go through this, and if you were really experienced, you would notice things. And there are signs in here that I pointed out in our dry run for this workshop, but we're not going to do that now because that's one of those I know something and you don't. And that's not useful to try to get you to guess what it is. But the next thing we're going to do is we are going to take a look at this executable in VirusTotal. So let me go ahead and stop sharing this screen. I am going to share a different one with you. There we go. I'm going to share with you my Explorer. So I'm going to go to virustotal.com. Let me just paste that in. There we go. Virustotal.com is the website that I'm at right now. And we'd used this last year, but if you didn't do that workshop last year, that's okay. This is a website that collects samples of things from viruses, from the files, the executables, pieces of them, the strings that they use. It just keeps a database of all of these things and tries to store information about them and make them available to the public. And that's exactly what we want. We want to be able to, we can feed it a file, a URL, or we can just search for things. We're actually going to just feed it a file. So I am going to open up again, I can't share my screen, so you can't see exactly what this looks like, but I'm opening up a Explorer window, and I'm just going to see, where's that file? Executable 1640, and I'm going to copy it in. I'm just going to drag it over this and drop it. And I'm going to let that run. And you guys go ahead and do the same thing. Copy that file over into VirusTotal and just take a look at what VirusTotal is saying here. In case it's not obvious, things in red are bad in VirusTotal. And everything went super red right away. But just take a look at some of the things that it's showing you. So what this page is now showing you is that it sort of takes a census of a whole bunch of antivirus and malware scanning sites and services and tries to see if they recognize this as malware. So this first thing is showing us that 30 out of 65 of the services that it's taking a survey of are recognizing this as malicious. These red things are saying, yeah, this is malware, and then it gives a name for them. So a bunch of these are saying malicious. They're saying Trojan, Trojan generic KD. So this file that we pulled out, this reader SL, this is probably not Adobe that's running in the background. This right now is a red flag. This is definitely some malware that's running inside of the machine. We can click on these tabs up here and it'll give us more information. So all kinds of hash information, the history of the file when it was first found. This file was first submitted in 2012, we can see, which is interesting because we know that this memory dump was created around that time. It'll tell us some of the names that this file was given. So it has seen this file called executable1640.exe, which is what we had. So this file's probably been submitted before. Also readersl.exe. So this is almost definitely trying to disguise itself as Adobe Reader somehow. It is almost definitely not Adobe Reader. And then it gives more information. There's all kinds of stuff down here. It'll give you sort of its information about memory sections inside of it. It'll tell you in this relations tab, it'll tell you about IP addresses that it associates to it and IP addresses it was trying to contact. The last time it was scanned, all kinds of information. All of this stuff is super useful. Down here, 6 contacted IPs. It seems to drop files. It contains domains. It has at least one process that it creates. And so remember, we're supposed to be incident responders here. We've been given this memory dump and asked, is there malware on this machine? And now we can pretty confidently say almost certainly, yes, there is malware on this machine. And this is what it looks like when you find it. All of this stuff that we're finding here on this page, though, all of these IP addresses, we haven't seen these inside the file, but we would want to copy these IP addresses out. Or any of these files that are associated to it, or these other file names, we would want to copy all of these things out, because these are other names that this virus or this malware can take. If it's running in our network or in our company or at our university, we would want to search for all of these names to see if anything else is running with these. These are all bad things that are probably running in a system. If this is in here, it might be running under different names. Here's more IPs that seem to be connected to it. These are other files that seem to be connected to it, so we would want to search for any of those inside of our system. We would want to red flag anything that's associated with these. These are more files and hosts and processes that it associates itself with. And then this community section is people can post notes and things. A Hybrid Analysis has posted a scan, so this is another malware site that does scans. So I'm going to just right click on that and open link in new tab. So this is another similar website that has some information on this executable, and it has a report generated on it. So there's all kinds of information here, and this will all be super useful. We would want to take this in our report for our incident response report for this memory sample that we've got, this memory dump. So okay, this is all useful. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint here. So yeah, we did some sleuthing. We looked at the process dump that gave us the executable. We could put the executable into VirusTotal. Then we looked at the memory dump. That actually tells us what's inside of that program, and we found a whole list of banking stuff. Super suspicious that Adobe Reader would have that much banking stuff inside of it. So if we keep going, yeah, this is when I sort of give it away. So what you're looking at is a banking Trojan known as Cridex. And this is a Trojan that gets onto a machine that disguises itself as Adobe Reader and runs in the background. And the reason we found all of that banking information, or all that list of banks, is because this Trojan is watching everything that's going on in the computer and is trying to watch for when someone's going to their banking website, and then is trying to take their login information, their username and their password. That's what it's doing. The network connection that we saw was it trying to connect back outside. So yeah, we did another search with that ZB, and we found that it was making this post request. That post request is this banking Trojan sending information out. It's sending someone's username and password back to a command and control server that is listening for any credentials that are going to get sent. So we want to know a little bit more about the website. This is another way we could try to figure out if this was malware. So we're going to use this website called Mnemonic. And let me get you the address for this. So this website Mnemonic is a database of DNS information. I'm gonna go there. So yeah, it's a database of DNS information, and it's going to, it keeps information about sites that it finds suspicious. So we can feed an IP address into this, and it'll tell us about what that IP address resolves to. So we can figure out maybe that 41.168.5.140, that one that I had you write down earlier that you should have taken some notes on. I'm going to just toss that in. And what this is going to do is it's going to run through its database, and it's going to see that in the past, this IP address has resolved. I'm just going to make this full screen for you. In the past, this IP address has resolved to these websites. So we know that this happened somewhere around 2012. And so the first one that we see down here is selledkingdoms.ru. Any website that has .ru at the end is associated with Russia. And if you think you've got malware and it's trying to connect to a .ru website, that's probably bad. That's probably, oops, sorry, I went back there. That's not a good thing. That means that it's probably trying to connect to some sort of group that is running this malware and they're stealing things. And in this case, yeah, if you were to have this running on your computer and you logged into your banking information while this was running, it was probably going to send your banking information back to this IP address, which was registered somewhere in Russia. And we can see when it was first seen, when it was last seen, how many times it was seen, and the time to live on that DNS entry. We can see later it went to support.treinternational.com. That's a weird website. And then we can see in 2013, a few months later, it went back to a .ru website. And we can click on these and find out more information about them. Over here, there's just a tab of each one, support tray. And then we can find more IP addresses. But this first one is probably suspicious. As we can see, if you look down here, we can see that this domain name, this name, selledkingdoms.ru, changed the IP address that it resolved from, what is this, like multiple times a day? Yeah, multiple things. It was resolving to multiple IP addresses at different times, which is suspicious. That's weird. Oop, I keep going out of it. Sorry, guys. So yeah, that mnemonic site is a great way to look at those IP addresses and sort of figure out what they might have been associated to and what sort of activity was going on with those IP addresses. So I told you that everything that we find on sort of VirusTotal and any of those other analysis sites, we would want to package together in our report, and we would want to hand that back to whoever gave us this memory dump and say, yep, you've got malware, and here's a bunch of things you need to start looking out for on your system. And down at the bottom here, I say that we pass to SOC to block. What that means is the SOC, the Security Operations Center for our company, so we might hire that out to an outside company. This is just the group that is constantly watching internet traffic and trying to figure out if bad stuff is coming and going from our system. And any of those IP addresses, that selledkingdom.ru website, we would pass that to them and say, this looks like it's suspicious. This is associated to some malware. If you see any internet traffic coming in from this place, it's definitely block it. But if you see any traffic from inside of our company that is trying to connect to that, block it and tell us what computer it's coming from, because that computer is probably going to be infected with this malware as well, and we need to go and fix that computer. We need to go wipe it and get rid of this stuff. So persistence. We talked about volatile memory, which was the RAM, versus persistent memory, which is the hard drive. One of the questions we can ask is this malware only in RAM? Is it only running on the computer as it's running right now? Like if we shut the computer off and turn it back on, is it going to be gone? Does it only live in the RAM, or does it also live in the hard drive? And this is important to understand and figure out, because if it's in the hard drive somehow, that means that you could restart the computer and the malware will still be there. So we want to try to understand if there's any persistence that's been gained by this program or by this malware. And to do that, we're going to look at, we're going to use this plugin called HiveList. So I need to change the window that I'm sharing. Let me just give you the command so you can run this yourself. Toss that in chat for you. Again, if anyone has any questions or anything, by all means, toss them in chat. It's been really quiet, which is either a good thing or a bad thing. I've been sort of stepping you through. We're going to do basically this entire process again, except I'm going to let you run wild with it for a little while. So there's the Hive list. How would malware only live in memory is a question that just came up. How would malware only live in memory? So like, how would it only be in the RAM and not on the hard drive? If you downloaded if you ran a file from the internet somehow, if you downloaded something and ran it, maybe it didn't put anything into the hard drive, and it could just be running like for the time being. It's possible. Malware could not put itself onto the hard drive or anywhere else on the system. Maybe it just wants to run once. Maybe it just wants to run like a bunch of commands and destroy your entire machine, like burn itself down, or delete everything that it finds. In that case, it could only be in the RAM. Usually malware will try to figure out some way to become persistent, which is to say that it wants to be on the computer every time it starts up. It wants to live on this machine. But it depends on the malware. Sometimes it doesn't want to. There is malware out there, or there were some of the first malware programs that were ever created did just live in memory. Actually, in fact, my favorite piece of malware ever, Slammer, is essentially this. It just lives in memory. It just gets passed around and just executes over and over and over and just spams out tons of internet traffic and tries to shut things down. And it doesn't live on the hard drive. It just lives, it just lives in memory. So if you restarted the computer, it would disappear, but usually within a few seconds, some other computer would send it to you. Some more questions. Does malware get expired? Yes, it can. If the malware is written to work on like Windows XP, maybe it won't work on Windows 10. So that's a case where malware is written for a certain machine and then it just isn't updated, so it just can't run anymore. The same way that like a computer game from 40 years ago probably isn't going to run in Windows 11 today. So the malware would need to be updated in order to run properly. In some cases, they will actually write, the people will actually write it to expire at a certain time. You actually only want it to run for a certain amount of time and then stop because you don't want it to get too much attention. So it is possible for malware to expire. And is there any advantage to malware not being on disk? Yeah, it's harder to find. If the malware is just running in memory, it could crash the computer. And if no memory dump is created, then you wouldn't be able to figure out what happened. You could look at the hard drive, but it wouldn't be on the hard drive. It would only have been in RAM, and it would be a lot harder to figure out what happened. So there is malware that does that. Malware, we think of malware as something that's super destructive, that tries to destroy things a lot of the time. That's what it used to be in a lot of cases, and malware today is usually more sophisticated. It usually tries to establish persistence, like it tries to get onto your hard drive and stay there. It wants to run every time the computer runs because it's usually just sitting in the background trying to get private information from you. That banking Trojan that we're looking at right now, this is what malware wants to do most of the time. It wants to do that, or ransomware is the big one. It'll get on your computer, it'll establish itself and become persistent, and then it'll encrypt all of your files, and it needs to keep running because it wants you to pay Bitcoin to decrypt your hard drive. So a lot of malware wants to be persistent because it's way more useful to be persistent. But there are advantages. If you are a spy agency and you are trying to shut down an Iranian nuclear plant, the Stuxnet malware was persistent. But if you wanted it to just go in and destroy things, then you would make it not persistent. It would go in, it would cause havoc, it would try to destroy the computer or damage it in some way that the memory wouldn't be readable, and then you would have no evidence of what probably happened. So that's one of the advantages. It depends on what you want to do with the malware. So yeah, we're going to do this hive list command. I think I posted it earlier. Yeah, let me reshare my terminal. And I should say, good questions. Thank you guys all for asking questions. Those are interesting questions, and I like them. So yeah, we're going to run hive list. So what is hive list? Yeah, someone posts centrifuges go burr. That's because Stuxnet kills centrifuges. Okay, so this is what we've got here. What is this? What are we looking at right now? What is hive list? Windows, I'm just going to take this out of the bottom so you can see more. Windows keeps these things called hives. They're essentially groups, or they're data that is stored for running the machine, so like registry keys and things like that. And these hives can be interesting because they can store data that is used to start up the machine. We talked about the registry editor last year during our malware workshops. You've probably heard of the registry or registry keys, possibly. you've almost certainly never used it. You're not supposed to fuss around with it. What it does is it stores information that the computer needs to hold for a long time. So think of it like a database of what Windows needs to keep around to keep control over everything. So the registry might store what your resolution is on your desktop. It might store the color scheme that you're using for your Windows settings. One of the things it will store is a list of programs that start up when the machine boots up. That has to live on the hard drive. Remember, it can't live in RAM. It needs to be there every time the computer starts up. So the registry will hold that. And when Windows starts up and it starts up a whole bunch of programs, that's because there's a list that's kept in the registry. So these hives give us clues into what's happening in that registry. And so we can see all the different kinds of groups that are in here. Again, this is one of those, if you've never seen this before, none of this stands out to you. Something that is interesting that we can see is that this machine belongs probably to someone named Robert. In documents and settings, there's a Robert folder. So there's user data.dat. Nothing's really standing out too much right here. There's nothing that I'm finding here that is super useful. But like I told you, there's information that's kept inside of the registry, inside of some of these hives. The one that we're really interested in, that we usually want to check, is located in these startup values. So down at the bottom of this slide, you can see if you went into the registry, you would be able to look around and find this registry key. And we're kind of running out of time. I'm not going to do it now, but I could go in and show you what that looks like. But instead, we're going to try to print keys out of the registry. So this is a monster of a command. I am going to copy it out for you. There we go. So there's the command. What this is going to do is actually look inside that registry editor and try to find and print out whatever the keys are inside of there. These slides were all animated when I originally made them, so I didn't have everything on here. But if you run this command and you go ahead and look closely, there's one entry that's different from the rest of them, and it looks a bit odd and it stands out. And I've printed it down there. So I'm going to give you a second to copy that command and go and run it. And I'm just going to put this up on the screen and then switch to my terminal and do the same thing. Keep typing in my notepad document. So I'm going to paste the clipboard. I think that's good. I'm going to go ahead and run that. So it's now printing out that this registry holds key value pairs. So the key is something and the value is something. I'm going to make this a little smaller so it's a little easier to see. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of keys and subkeys. So this right here is the user class.dat file. There's no subkeys. The key name is run, and it doesn't look like there's any values in there. This one is in that document/settings, the Robert, the NT user dat. Subkey value is this. This is a registry key, so reg sz, and it's running this thing, kb00207877.exe, and that is located in application data for Robert. That's the thing that's going to be super suspicious to us. It doesn't make sense that there's some program with some weird name like that that's running out of Robert's documents and settings application data. That shouldn't be there. That doesn't look normal inside of a Windows machine. As you can see from the rest of this, there's basically no values for any of these other things, but there is a value for that. And this is going to be, again, associated to the malware that was running on this machine. So this tells us something about what was going on. We could search for this KB 0020 blah 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 blah.exe in this memory dump and pull it out and search it. We could reverse engineer it. We could figure out what it's doing. apologies, I have that text up there. We could figure out what it's doing. But we're not going to do that for this one. We're just going to keep going because we're pretty much at the end of this piece of malware. So in summary for this dump1 file, we found that explorer.exe was running. It was running reader sl.exe. We found some outside IP addresses, which seemed weird. Explorer doesn't usually connect like that. We wondered if it was Adobe Reader. It looked like it could be. We found bank web addresses inside of the memory for the reader program. Our virus total scan told us, yep, this is malicious. It's a Trojan. We found suspicious DNS records that linked back to Russian websites that were constantly changing IP addresses. And we found what looks like some sort of persistence mechanism inside this registry key. I know that that's not obviously connected to everything else that we found, but that file is suspicious. We could pull it out and we could look at it, and it would also say, yes, this is related to malware. It turns out that that file is actually what's loading. That file, that KB0020 file, is what's loading the malware into explorer.exe in something called process hollowing. We had a question earlier. Could how quickly it spawned out of explorer.exe on boot, as we saw earlier, be an indicator that it's on disk? Yes. Yes, that's absolutely the sign that it's on the disk. This is a question from Luke, and what Luke is referring to is, let me go back to this. We want the PS tree again. What Luke is asking about is, I told you earlier that explorer.exe started, and it starts what looks like, about 5 seconds after the computer starts up. And almost immediately when Explorer starts, this Adobe Reader thing starts, like immediately. If this was started by the user, when the machine logged on, when the machine started up, they, within 5 seconds, logged on and ran Adobe Reader immediately as they got their main screen. That's not a person doing that. You would expect at least a few seconds in there. The reason that it's starting immediately is because malware is injecting itself into this Explorer process, and this Explorer process is starting up the malware reader process. And then it's trying to connect out. This is the actual malware itself. This looks like Explorer, and it's located in explorer.exe. I remember I said earlier that might not be where it's supposed to be. We can try to figure that out. But this is where the malware is located inside. It's called process hollowing. It takes a process that normally runs, so it's not suspicious to see Explorer running on a Windows machine. So we probably look at that and be like, oh, Explorer, yeah, that always runs. Don't worry about that. But it turns out that Explorer is hiding stuff inside of it. The memory inside of Explorer has been replaced with malware, and the malware is running disguised as Explorer right now. So, yeah, good question, Luke. That's exactly what that was. That was why I was sort of pointing that out. That's an indicator that it's on the disk. Is that it's starting? This is the machine starting up, and the malware is starting up immediately, which means it's probably on the hard drive. It's not something the user did. Okay, so that was memory dump 1. We are just past 7:30, so this is running about as long as I expected it to from our practice runs. We're going to look at memory dump 2. So I'm going to give you this list, and I want you to go and do the same thing we just did, but with memory dump 2. So I'm going to clear my screen. I'm going to go out. Remember, we're in the dump 1 folder. We're here. I'm going to unzip dump2.zip. Remember what the password is. It's sick magpie. So this gets inflated, so it gets brought back up. There's the dump2 folder, so I'm going to cd into dump2. There's our memory dump for this one. So in this one, I've stepped you through how this works. I'm going to let you go on your own for a little while, and I'm going to show you the commands that we used from last time. So I'm going to give you, let's say, 7 minutes. Go ahead, examine this in sort of the same way that we examined the last one. See what you can find. Toss into chat anything that you find suspicious or anything you think, I don't think this is normal. Does anyone want to look at this? indicators of compromise, whatever you think is suspicious in there. Go ahead. We'll go through this in 7 minutes. About 2 more minutes left. Let me know if anyone's gone through and found anything or is finished. All right, coming back in. People have been tossing things in the chat, which is good. Why do hackers like Explorer.exe so much? It's easy to abuse, and it's very common to see running. So it's hard to know if you can trust it. If you're looking for malware and you think it's in Explorer.exe, you have to check it every single time. But it's also easier to abuse to get malware inside of it because of the way that Windows runs. And Neil said this one is running a VM, which is interesting. Yeah, the information that you're finding in your process list is sort of showing some VM software is running on this machine. And Luke says MS success, yeah, whatever that process is, looks wacky. Yeah, you would run an internet search to see what that process does. So I'm going to open up here. So I ran PS tree to start out with. These are all the processes that we see running, a whole lot more that's running on this machine. A lot more processes up here, a lot more stuff down here. So take a copy of that, copy it all out. Make some space on my notepad down here. There we go. What else do we like to do? So PS list, we did our PS tree command. Conscan, yeah, we like to see what connections are going on this machine. So let's run a conscan. PS tree, we want conscan. Any connections coming in out? Yeah, lots of connections. All these connections are associated to 1752. What was 1752? Explorer.exe is making internet connections again. There we go. We can see all these ports on the local machine that it's connecting with. And all of these are suspicious, likely suspicious remote addresses. Copy it all out. All good stuff. This might help us find some of the whatever's bad it's running on this machine. This is a new command that I'm going to introduce you to. It's sockets. So this will list open sockets at the time of the memory dump. We just did one for connections, but let's replace conscan with sockets. So instead of conscan, sockets. Now this is going to show us a bunch of information. These are all the sockets running on the machine. All of the addresses that they're connecting out to are localhost. This is because this was a VM that was set up to stop bad internet traffic or malware from getting out. So it's just connecting to the localhost. But there we can see the port that's being used and the type of protocol that's being used by these and the time that it's being used at. So it can help us understand when the internet connections were being made and where they were going. I'm going to then grep that for 1752. We only really care right now about those 1752 processes. Those are the ones that Explorer.exe is making. There we go. There are at least 3. They're all TCP connections, and they're all being made out on those ports. So that's an interesting thing if you're looking for malware. The conscan works nicely with sockets to help understand the information a little more. So yeah, that helps us understand a little more. Next, another new one I'm going to introduce you to is DLL list. So this will show you all of the DLLs loaded by a process. A DLL is sort of the equivalent of a shared library in Windows. A process can load these in for extra functions and more things to do. So any process will usually load DLLs up to load more functionality into it. So we're going to spill out this DLL list. This is sort of like in a program when you're writing and you're importing libraries. These DLLs that are imported are used to give the program more functionality. So same thing, except instead, let me clear this. We want DLL list. I'll go ahead and run that. This list is huge. These are these things on the right are all of the DLLs that are being loaded in. Windows has a lot of these things, and programs can import them to get extra functionality. So there's a whole lot of them. It'll tell you the size. It'll tell you where they're located in the memory of this file. But the path is the one that we're interested in. So cmd.exe is the command prompt. So this program is loading up the command prompt. And in fact, this process is the command prompt. cmd.exe was running on the machine. And then it's loading in all of these things. This is, again, none of these are suspicious. All of these are suspicious. You're probably not sure. You've probably never seen them. But what we're curious about is process 1752. So let's go through this list. I'm going to scroll up. Let's see what 1752 is loading in. Is it loading in any DLLs? And if so, which ones? Way up. There's an easier way to do this. I'm just going to grep for 1752, and I'm going to say A. So I want everything that comes after for 30 lines. And I wrote 1753, which my computer knows is not the same number, which means my computer is working right. Okay, so there we go. This is the Explorer process, 1752. Again, see Windows Explorer.exe. Is that the place where it's supposed to live? And here's everything that it's loading in. So it's loading up that Explorer thing. It's loading the Windows kernel information. Normalize.dll, that sounds a little bit weird. That doesn't look like any of these. Crypt32.dll is one that, if you have any experience, is weird. This is a cryptography library that Windows is some reason loading up in Explorer. This is something you would not usually find. That is super suspicious behavior. So we've dumped those DLLs, and we found some things that look suspicious. Let me see. There's more lines. Let me see 40 lines after. Yeah, there's more information. It's loading up that normalize. There's another crypt UI, so there's more crypt libraries that it's loading in. 1752 might be doing some cryptography related stuff, which is not something that Explorer should be running. That's never something that Explorer should be running. And then the next thing I want to show you, and we're running close to the end of our time, is malfind. So this is going to scan for signs of known malware. So volatility has a way of looking for signs of malware inside of the memory, which is great. This could save us a lot of trouble. I could have shown you this at the beginning, and you probably could have just found it really quickly. But this is going to be a helpful one. Let's see if I have that malfind command. I do. So that malfind command is going to do similar to what it did before. Vol.py and then tacf dump 2. So that's the memory dump that we want. The profile is the Windows XP Service Pack 2. I didn't run the image info on this one. It was the same one. I'm sorry. I should have run that at first. That's the first step on looking at a memory dump. And then you want malfind. That's the plugin. TACP, the process ID, and TACD is where it's going to dump the information. So any information it gets, it's going to put into a file for us. So I'm going to put this up for you as a comment. I'm going to go back here. And then I just change my command around. So malfind TACP 1752 TACD dot. And here we are. And let's see. It's spitting all kinds of stuff out at us. Oh, it's our old friend assembly. It's everyone's friend assembly. If Luke is still here, Luke, you can read this for us. And this is Intel assembly, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, what malfind has done is it said, here are places in memory where I have found things that look suspicious to me and that look like malware. So it spits it out in this sort of hex dump at the beginning. This right here is the start of this malware, or what it thinks is malware. It starts with MZ. That means it's an executable. So this might be a piece of memory that it thinks is malware and is part of an executable. It found it in explorer.exe, process 1752 again. So this is pretty much confirmation for us that 1752 is a suspicious process. Something else, and you can look this up later on, this VADS protection. So these things that are running inside the computer would usually have some protection on the process. You shouldn't be able to go in and mess with processes while they're running. Malware is written in such a way that it is able to. Remember when I said the process injection or hollowing allows it to inject itself into a running process? One of the things it has to do is it has to change the control of the memory to make it readable, writable, and executable. So if you see a piece of memory in the machine that has this, it's a possible sign that it's been tampered with. And the fact that this has execute, read, and write on it means that someone has probably tampered with explorer.exe and written new stuff in there and has resumed explorer.exe with malware inside. So that's an interesting little nugget, something that's good to look for and to find. Then there's all this malware. And then there's all this assembly. We don't need to look at the assembly. We don't need to read the assembly. It's just there to torture us, we all know. But what it did do, remember the command, the TACD on the command said dump what you find into files. Well, here are our files. These are samples of these processes, and we can use those like we did before. We could run strings on them, but I don't think that's going to be super helpful. Always write string, never write strings. I get that wrong so often. Yeah. This is process memory, so it's, sorry, this is like process, so it probably doesn't have a lot of good strings in it. But we could use our old friend VirusTotal, and I'm going to open it up over here. And I'm going to share screen, VirusTotal. Sorry, it's a little clunky. I'm going to go back to virustotal.com. Go into my Explorer, pull out one of these process files and send it in there, and bam. VirusTotal gives us a better score than before. We get a 50 out of 66. And it's saying that, yeah, this malware find, what it found, VirusTotal is also recognizing as malware. Again, looks like some sort of Trojan. Detects strings from well-known APT malware. So there's just some sort of reports that people have posted for us. But yeah, here's a bunch of sites that are telling us this is malware. All of these scanners and like Kaspersky, McAfee, Microsoft, they all recognize a file like this as malware. So we've definitely found some malware on this system. And let me get back to presentation. I'm trying to hurry a little bit to get us finished because we're running out of time. So that was malfind, and let me just give a quick summary of this one then. Yeah, so this is dump 2. So we found that explorer.exe was opening sockets, which is not something it should do. It shouldn't be making connections or opening sockets. We found 2 outside IPs. We could have done more investigation on those, but those are definitely indicators of compromise. Anything trying to connect to those IP addresses is probably going to be malware related. If we looked at the timing, it was opening those connections very quickly. We found some weird DLLs that it was loading up, the crypt DLLs, so it was giving it cryptography abilities. Malfind gave us 2 samples, and then VirusTotal scan confirmed it was malware. And to tell you what this is the Shylock banking Trojan. So this is another banking Trojan that is on your machine trying to look for banking information. We are just about 8 o'clock. That's our 2 hours that we usually run here. So I left the third memory dump in just in case we had time. I tried to push it a little faster, but we don't have time to get there. Feel free to go ahead and look at that. You can investigate it the same way that we've been investigating these other pieces of malware. I am going to make it a flag if you can figure out what the malware is that this is. You should using what you've learned so far tonight, you should be able to figure out what kind of malware is running in dump number 3. I'm going to make that a flag for some points in our system, in our Discord channel, so you can direct message Orchid. You can send a DM to Orchid with UCSec, and then in brackets the name of the malware, just in regular ASCII characters. It doesn't have to be leet, anything like that. If you have any trouble with that, if it doesn't give you any points for it, you can direct message me. You can DM me on Discord. I am Jeremy on there. And let me just zoom ahead a bunch of slides. Also in there is memory dump number 4 that I gave you. So that is a memory dump from a Windows machine that I created. There's no malware in it. That is not the point of it. I have hidden flags all over the place in there. There's a bunch of processes running. There's flags hidden around Windows in various places. And I've told you about pretty much all of the places tonight where there are flags hidden in dump number 4. So if you find this sort of thing interesting, and I find this pretty fun, you're looking for clues and hints and spying around inside of a machine, trying to figure out where things are and where the compromises are, then memory dump 4 will give you something to do and give you a bit of a challenge in some places to find those flags. There's 5 flags inside of memory dump number 4. They start with UCSec, and then they're in brackets. Again, direct message Orchid, our bot. Otherwise, that's going to be it for tonight. I hope you guys learned. I hope you guys found it interesting and stuck with us and found it fascinating. That's the basics of how to use volatility. It's a great tool. It's really well known. It's used a lot in, like I said, memory forensics. It's used in incident response. It's used in CTFs a lot. So that's how we got introduced to it. We actually had a volatility challenge in last year's Magpie CTF that we hosted. And I think learning what you learned tonight, you would have been able to find that flag. So volatility is a great tool. Malware is super interesting. It's dangerous and destructive, of course, but I find it fascinating and enjoy trying to learn how it works and looking around in a machine. I hope you guys enjoyed this workshop. If you have any questions, by all means, send me a message on Discord or post in our Discord channel and let us know what the questions were. And yeah, I hope you guys had a good night. Just a second, just to clarify, is the flag for dump 3 vmem in the form UCSec malware type? Yes, sorry, it's going to be UCSec brackets and then the name of the malware. Yeah, you'll probably know it when you find it. Otherwise, yeah, everyone have a great night. Thanks for coming out. Next week is another workshop sort of in the same idea of trying to defend a system, trying to be on the blue team, not the hacker, but the defenders. We hope you come out for it. It's going to be an interesting one. But yeah, we hope to see you guys next week and have a great night. Thanks, guys.